Do federal law enforcement do federal law enforcement jobs discriminate against black men? Let's talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the real Ray Han, and here on my channel, I discuss real life situations and experiences that I've gone through as a 44-year-old black man. For those of you who have been here with me on the channel for maybe the last 2 months or so, maybe longer, you know that I'm a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. At the age of 22, I was honorably discharged from the United States Air Force. With that discharge came a government clearance, secret clearance, if I'm not mistaken, because the job that I did in the military required me to manipulate the military database, which at the time was called SPIRI. I'm not sure what it is called today because I've been out of the military for over 20 years. I also had access to the personnel files of every military member that was on my duty station. And this is the reason for the clearance. Now, I'm not sure if every military job requires you to have some form of government clearance. I think it is highly dependent on the information that you have access to or the information that you're able to manipulate. My job gave me access to a lot and the ability to manipulate a lot. Okay. In the military, I also worked as an augmentee for the Security Forces Squadron. The Security Forces, for those of you who don't know, is the equivalent of a police officer. You just do police work for the military. As somebody who is incredibly self-aware of myself, my strengths, my weaknesses, I self-assessed and realized at the age of 22, now that I am a veteran who was honorably discharged from the military, I have to figure out the best way to use that to my advantage, along with the experience that I accumulated in the military. I knew based on my demeanor, based on my intellect, based on how articulate I am when I communicate, whether it be in writing or whether it be verbally. Some people even speak about my demeanor, how I come off unapproachable or sometimes intimidating. I knew immediately that whatever career field I was going to move into, it had to make the best out of everything that I just described, whether those things were in any kind of way derogatory or not. So I knew that I was going to go into something that had to be pseudo law enforcement, okay? Something that was along those lines because I could use the 4 years, which is one enlistment that I had just completed in the Air Force as job experience, okay? Plus the fact your government clearance, if I'm not mistaken, my clearance was at a secret level. And once a clearance is granted, it is good for a period of 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So by the time I got out of the military, my clearance was still active, which meant I had a year to find employment that was going to take over that clearance, which was still going to be good. That was great. That gave me leverage over the average 22-year-old male or female of any race. So again, being self-aware, I had to figure out what I was going to do, and I knew that I wanted it to be something that was pseudo military. All right, I'm not pseudo military, pseudo law enforcement. When I separated from the Air Force at the age of 22, it was July of 2023. I knew immediately that I was going to start applying for law enforcement jobs because me being military, the 4 years of experience plus the fact that I already have a clearance and no criminal record obviously is going to make the background check and the screening process much easier for somebody who is just separating from the military. Now, I applied to quite a few federal law enforcement jobs because a county law enforcement job or a local level law enforcement job was not going to be the equivalent, even though it is still considered law enforcement. Clearly you would want to be a federal law enforcement officer for the benefits such as the compensation, the pay, the retirement. All of these things are going to be much better at the federal level. I applied to Capitol police officers. I applied to United States, the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. Now, for those of you who have been with me here on the channel for quite some time, you already know that I've worked as an armed security officer for the Department of Homeland Security for the last 18 years. You know that I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force. You also know that I worked 1 year as a 911 emergency dispatcher for the city of Washington, D.C. So a lot of my background in terms of career field is pseudo law enforcement. And like I said, that's me being self aware and taking advantage of my personality, taking advantage of my characteristics, taking advantage of my experience in the military, if I'm being quite honest. So when I separated, I applied for quite a few of these federal law enforcement jobs. As I previously mentioned, I applied for Park Police. I applied for Uniform Division of the Secret Service. I applied for Capitol Police, there were others that I applied for, but those are the ones that immediately stand out. Now, let me briefly talk about my Capitol police officer application. We do know Capitol Police is a federal law enforcement job. They are responsible for policing the nation's capital. Now, what you got to understand is the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., at any given time, you'll have a dozen or 2 dozen different law enforcement agencies that are in that area. You can have MPD, FPS, Capitol Police, Secret Service, Park Police, FBI, CIA. You can have all of those different agencies in there at one time. Capitol Police, they are specifically tasked with policing the Capitol buildings. Okay, that's where they'll be posted. That's where their patrols will be. That's pretty much where they are. We briefly talk about that experience. When I applied to the Capitol Police, they wanted me to, as always, they wanted me to come down to like a day where you're required to take their test and see how well you score, as well as their physical agility tests. When I took their written test, I scored a 96, which is a damn near perfect score. This was at the age of 23. Like I said, very recently separated veteran from the United States Air Force. Scored a 96 on their written tests. Their physical agility tests, I can't remember, but usually it requires you to run a certain distance within a certain amount of time. Have to do something physical, like maybe push ups, sit ups. Perhaps you'll have to drag a 70 or 170-pound dummy from one line to another line just to show that you're able to move somebody out of an emergency situation if need be. All of these things were fairly easy for me to do at the age of 22, 23 years old. Okay, recently separating from the military. Um, Took their tests, got a 96 on it, passed their physical agility tests, and I want to say probably about a month had passed and I did not hear anything from an investigator. Now, once you pass the test, they'll pull you in a back room and let you know what you scored, how well your application is going to be moving forward, that it's going to be signed to an investigator who will contact you and let you know the next steps. I want to say about a month passed and I had not heard anything from an investigator. So I reached out to Capitol Police myself to try to figure out what was going on with my actual application. I tested on this date. This is the score I made. I took the physical agility test afterwards, and this was the score I made there. However, it's been a month and I haven't heard anything from an investigator. The person on the other end of the phone told me they're going to look into that and I should be hearing from an investigator in a short period of time. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail and I saw that it was addressed from the United States Capitol Police. And I'm like, okay, now we're making progress. I open the letter and it reads to the following: we regret to inform you that you were not selected to move forward in the process, and we chose to go with more qualified candidates. Now, let's be clear. Who's going to be more qualified than a 23-year-old man who is recently separated from the armed forces under honorable conditions, okay, who passed your written tests with a damn near perfect score and passed your physical agility test? Who? I mean, there's only going to be one candidate that's going to be more qualified than me, and that would be a law enforcement officer who is lateraling from another agency into Capitol Police. And if they're lateraling over from another agency, they're probably already substantially older than me, and they're coming close to that age restriction that they have, because in law enforcement you have to get in to whatever agency it is that you're applying to get into before you turn, if I'm not mistaken, it's either 35 or 36 is the cutoff. At the time, I was 23. So who's more qualified than me? It's not even realistic that there was another more qualified candidates than myself. I took that one on the chin because I was 23 years old. I didn't know any better. So I continued to put in my applications with other federal law enforcement agencies. The next one I decided to go with was the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. For those of you who don't know, the Secret Service has two different divisions. You have the Uniform Division; those are the ones who dress in the police officer uniforms. It usually looks like some style of battle dress uniform, body armor, boots, those kind of things. Okay, and then you have the actual Secret Service agents who are tasked with like protecting the president, the vice president, the ones who pretty much look like the men in black. I was applying for the uniform division. Okay, again, I'm 24 at the time, maybe 25. Now, I'm definitely not older than 25 because all of these applications I was submitting shortly after separating from the military. Again, because I had a clearance and I knew my clearance was going to expire in a certain amount of time. So as long as my clearance was active, that's a huge advantage that I'm going to have over other applicants who don't have a clearance. Okay. I applied to United States Secret Service Uniform Division. Okay. I went down there, I took their tests. You got to do the same thing, their written tests and their agility tests. Their written tests, again, I scored on their written tests, I believe I scored a 98. Again, this is a damn near perfect score. I passed their agility test, and why wouldn't I? As a 24-year-old male who just separated from the military, physical fitness is something the military takes very seriously. They actually use it to determine whether you're going to be promoted to the next rank or not, regardless of your time and grade and your time in service. So I passed their physical agility test. Um, and I was waiting to see if the same thing was going to happen. Is a background investigator actually going to contact me? Because Capitol Police told me that, and no one ever did. I received a letter in the mail saying that they chose to go with more qualified candidates, and I wasn't selected. It was different with the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. I actually received a letter in the mail letting me know who my background investigator was and what the next steps in the process were. This was great. So I had to submit some documents to them, birth certificate, social security, all of these different documents um, that I had to submit to them to prove my identity. Obviously, they saw that I already had a government clearance from the military, so that was great. They invited me in I got all the way through their process up to, it was a panel interview, I believe is what they call it. And that means you're like close to the end of the processing. They're close to giving you your actual training date where you can begin training. So I get to this panel interview, and I can remember I was in a room. There was a desk. There were quite a few desks, but I was sitting at one desk in the center of it, and there were seats on each end of the desk. I was being interviewed by a young man who was of Asian descent. I don't know which form of Asian, so I don't want to say he was either Korean or I don't, like I said, I don't know. But he was of Asian descent. He was the interviewer, and for a very long time, it was just he and I in the room. Now, the room, there was a desk. He and I were at that desk, and opposite of where I was sitting, there was I'm pretty sure it was a two-sided mirror, a mirror where, for those of you who don't know, a two-sided mirror is usually the type of mirror that they have in an interrogation room in a police department where the suspect is in that room and the people who are investigating it are on the other side of that mirror. They can see into the room, but the suspect cannot see them on the opposite side of the mirror. Okay. For a majority of the interview, I was being interviewed by this Asian young man, and he wanted to talk about things such as my finances, um, criminal history, which there was none, experiences in the military, which you guys know I've already did a full video here on the channel about why Black men should not join the military, where I talk about a lot of my military experiences there. For those of you that may be curious about those experiences, you definitely want to check that video out, because I had to talk about a lot of those situations with this particular young man that was interviewing me for the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. He wanted to talk about things that I did in my childhood. Like, have you ever set something on fire? Have you ever hit anybody because you were angry? All of these kind of tests. I think it kind of served as not only a panel interview, but maybe it also served as a psychological evaluation because I didn't understand the line of questioning. I mean, I was able to easily answer these questions, but it still didn't make sense for it to be considered a panel interview. Okay. I want to say about halfway through, when he started talking about work experience, that's when a young lady walked in. She was a black. She was a black young lady. I want to say, if I had to guess her age, she might have been about 30, maybe between the ages of 34 and 38. Best I can think. If you happen to see this video, young lady, and you were actually younger than that at the time, I apologize. Okay. Anyway, she walks into the room. She says nothing, not to him, not to me. She sits down at the table across from me and she just stares at me. I thought that was kind of strange, but she just stares at me. And the first thing that came to my mind is, okay, she must be trained to look people in their face and tell when they're lying. That must be it, because she just stared at me. It was literally like this blank stare, like, for the duration of the meeting. The young man, who was Asian, he continued with the interview questions, but he was asking me about specific things that took place in my job. Have you ever been fired from a job? We already know. We've already know that I most definitely have been fired from a job before. So he was asking me, have you ever been fired from a job, and for what reasons were you fired from the job? Or terminated was the word that he used. And I had to go into detail about each situation leading up to that particular point. Now there was one particular job, because he was going over like my employment history, because that was a part of the application. He was asking me about my employment history, and he was like, I see that you left quite a bit of jobs, because you didn't like the schedule, you didn't like the days off that they provided you. Full disclosure, for those of you who are aware, security jobs, usually when you come into a security job, they place you kind of at they place you at the bottom of the seniority list. Those at the bottom of the seniority list usually get the worst shift or the worst days off, okay, or the worst hours. It's because everything in security usually is determined by seniority, especially if that security company or those officers are under the union. Okay, the CBA, collective bargaining agreement, usually determines that the best shifts, the best days off are awarded to those who have the most seniority. Okay, just to get that out of the way. So as I was talking to him about my employment history, it came to a point where he was asking, why did your employment end, or why did you leave that job? And my response to a lot of the jobs that I left, I'm like, because I was offered another position that was giving me either better pay, or it was giving me a better schedule, or better days off that were more suitable to my lifestyle. That's when she spoke. The young lady who came in, who was just staring at me with a blank look the entire time, that's when she actually spoke. And she's like, okay, you, like, I kind of noticed that too. Like, you said that you've left, it sounds like 4 jobs now, because you didn't like the days off, or you didn't like the schedule. This is the United States Secret Service. Now, no offense to any young women who may be of the black ethnicity, but she was talking and she was making her neck roll side to side like this. And it was a lot of, okay, you do understand that if you come to the United States Secret Service, you can't just leave here because you don't like the shift or the off days that you get. And I kind of had to look at her. Now, this is one of the things that I'm sure a lot of people don't like about my personality. I don't think it's a negative. If you guys do, please drop it in the comment section. Okay. A lot of people tend to believe that they're the smartest person in the room. All right. They can't stand when somebody who has equal or greater intelligence shows them that they're not the smartest person in the room. I have a superhuman ability to do that. Now, by no means am I going to tell you that I'm smarter than you. You'll probably sense it based on the way that I articulate whatever it is that I'm trying to communicate to you. So after she was like, yeah, so you can't just leave this job because you don't like the shift or the days off that you might get. This is the United States Uniform Division of the Secret Service. And I was kind of like, nor would I leave this job because I don't like the schedule that I receive or the days that I get. The difference between this job and the 4 jobs that you're referencing that I left because I didn't like the shift or the days off that I received, is that this is a federal government job. This job will provide me with better benefits, a pension. It'll provide me with a retirement. In armed security, the only incentive you have to remain with that employer are the days off, the schedule that you receive, and the pay. But she was like, okay, but this is the United States Secret Service Uniform Division. You can't just leave here because you don't like the shift or the days off that you get. And I was like, ma'am, I literally just explained to you that I don't have the intention of doing that. I'm not going to explain it to you again. And I turned my attention away from her back to the Asian gentleman who was conducting the interview, right? And he was I could kind of see it in his face that he was like, yeah, he just explained that. Why is she saying it again? I could see it in his face, but he had to keep it professional because they work together. So that's when he started asking me about, moving forward with the rest of the questions that he needed to ask me. And after he completed those questions, we concluded the interview. She immediately got up and she walked out of the room because I was like behind her because I was on my way out of the building. She walked out of the room. She opened the door. First off, she didn't even hold the door for me. She opened the door so that she can go out of it, and I had to catch it for myself. I thought that was incredibly rude. If you're watching it, you should have better home training than that. Okay. Let the door go. I caught the door for myself, and then she turned left, and there was another door right there that went into the room that was on the other side of the two-sided mirror. So I knew that she was going into that room probably to speak to the people who were on the other side of that mirror, the people that were watching this interview. Now, mind you, during the entire interview, the Asian gentleman, I'm not sure what his position was, I would just say interviewer, he was very much impressed with my responses. I can remember him saying things like, your finances are in order. Your background checked out really great. You already have a government experience. You're a military veteran. You know what I mean? You've worked as a 911 emergency dispatcher. You would actually be the perfect candidate for the positions that we have available. She walked her little ass out of that room and she went in that room where that two-sided mirror was, and whoever it was that she talked to, guess what happened? 2 weeks later, there was an envelope that came in the mail. We regret to inform you that you were not selected for this position. We chose to go with more qualified candidates. And I'm like, who the fuck is more qualified than me? At 24, 25 years old at the time of this application, with a government clearance, with at that time, there was now college education that came into play, 4 years of honorable military service, and I have experience at this point as an armed security officer. Mind you, I scored a 98 on your tests, and I was one of the highest times in terms of your physical agility test. Who's a better candidate than me? I remember the interviewer saying, yo, this guy's a perfect candidate. Who is a better candidate than me? Again, the only better candidate is going to be somebody lateraling over from another law enforcement agency who has all of the same things that I have, mind you, all of the same things that I have. Plus, they have military experience. Law enforcement experience from another agency. If that's not the candidate, then you don't have candidates that are better than me. Okay. I knew immediately what it was this young black lady who got up and was doing all of this shit like this. I knew she had gone into that room and she had used whatever influence she had over whoever it was in that room watching from the other end to override what the Asian gentleman was saying in the interview. Mind you, he thought I was a perfect candidate. She didn't. And she said it to whoever it was. And after she said it, I got a letter saying that I wasn't selected. Was it her or was it not her? I don't know. When it comes to these federal law enforcement jobs, because now I've told you about 2 experiences where I applied with the United States Secret Service Uniform Division and the United States Capitol Police, where I was not selected. Now, the difference being with the Capitol Police, there was no person of her nature that showed up and tried to use their influence to prevent me from moving forward, which leads me to believe that federal law enforcement jobs are actually discriminating against black men. Now, I've done armed security for the Department of Homeland Security in the National Capital Region, which I've already stated at any given time, there's over 24 different law enforcement agencies present in the National Capital Region on any given day at any given time. When I really stop and think about the 18 years that I've spent working in federal government buildings as an armed security officer, I cannot recall seeing that many many black federal law enforcement officers. Okay. She was one. She worked for the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. Prior to that, I may have seen another black male, probably within the last 3 years, that also worked in the Uniform Division of the Secret Service. Now, let's be clear. At my last armed security job, I was the lieutenant, the shift supervisor for the United States Department of Commerce, which, for those of you who don't live in the DC area or are not familiar with the National Capital Region, the United States Department of Commerce is literally across the street from the White House. It's literally across the street. I worked there for 5.5 years and saw one black male that was a Uniform Division Secret Service officer. Prior to that, it was the young lady who was making her neck snap from side to side. You can't leave this job because you don't like the shift you got. There was a 20-year difference between the two periods. I'm sorry. Maybe it was an 18, 19-year difference between two periods. You don't see black federal law enforcement officers for these agencies. The only federal law enforcement agency where I see an abundance of black men is FPS, Federal Protective Services. Federal Protective Services, FPS, works very closely with armed security officers because Federal Protective Services are actually the federal law enforcement agency that oversees federal government buildings. They would be the first ones who come to respond if there's a medical emergency, if there's a criminal investigation or any type of criminal activity that takes place in a federal government building. They would be the first ones to respond, okay? I notice that all of the black men that I've seen, they work for FPS. Now, let's be clear. Other federal law enforcement agencies look at FPS as the lowest of the federal law enforcement totem pole. They are like the lowest. They don't show them any respect. They look at them as, I don't know, like some type of maybe glorified or federalized security officer. That's what they're looked at. And that's how they're treated. That is the only federal agency where I've seen black men, an abundance of them. But even still, those black men are usually 45, 50 years old and up. I've never seen a young FPS officer. Those of you who work in the National Capital Region and you're familiar with FPS, if you're viewing this video, I need you to comment in the comment section. Have you ever seen a Federal Protective Services officer who was 35 or below? I also need you guys to comment. Have you ever seen a black Uniform Division Secret Service officer or Secret Service agent or Capitol Police officer that was black? How often are you seeing it? And it leads me to wonder, are these federal agencies actually discriminating against black men or black people for some unknown reason? Because I can't figure it out. I swear to you that I was told twice by two different federal law enforcement agencies, the Capitol Police and the Uniform Division of the Secret Service, that I was like the perfect candidate. I blew your fucking written test out of the water, almost scored perfectly on both of them. Your physical agility test was nothing to me. It was absolutely, it was almost like child's play. Yet and still, I was not selected to move forward in the process of a position of which I was told I was a perfect candidate. I need to know why. Why was that the case? You can't say it was because of my attitude or because anything, because you didn't know anything about me except what I told you, and what the interviewer saw and received from me was considered he's a perfect candidate. Yet and still, I was not selected. Now, I could be getting off of topic a little bit here, but as I previously mentioned, this was an application with the Uniform Division of the Secret Service, which is right across the street from my last place of employment, which was the White House. Okay. I worked at the Department of Commerce, which is right across the street from the White House. It leads me to believe that there's a bigger agenda as to why this may be. And this is going to be a radical twist to the video. We all know that last year there was an assassination attempt on on an individual who is currently in charge of the country at this time. I won't say the title because I don't want this video to be demonetized. Okay. It makes me wonder, do these things have something to do with some type of hidden agenda? Now, working in the Department of Commerce, I was the lieutenant. And what I can tell you is every time that individual's vehicles or motorcade move, the uniform division of the Secret Service comes to my building. Guess who they had to talk to? Me. Why? Because we got to take them up to the roof. We got to give them access to the roof so that they can set up their equipment and make sure they're able to immediately engage any threat to the path, along the path that those vehicles are moving. That was actually the job that I actually was trying to get when I applied with the uniform division of the Secret Service. That was actually the same job. The job that they do is a job that I was applying for. It's called it's a part of the sniper team. That was the job that I was trying to do. I remember the Asian gentleman was telling me so much about that particular job. Like, these guys go on like 1,500 missions a year. They're very short staffed because a lot of people, they can't take the pressure of that position because of how often they're required to be on call and go on these missions. It could be overseas, it could be here within the national capital region, but they feel like they're overworked. Okay, that was a job that I was going in there to do. So I know immediately these guys are coming into my building. I got to give them access to the roof so that they can do what it was that I was going to do, which was set up their equipment to make sure that they can see every rooftop, every window, and be immediately ready to engage any threat that might take place or might present itself or could potentially present itself along the path that those vehicles are moving. This happens all the time. All the time. I can't tell you how many times. So when I sit back and I look at the fact that I can't remember when it took place. Was it in October? I think it was September, October of 2024 when those assassination attempts took place. The very first one, I was already looking like, yo, hold up. Now, to somebody who don't know, to somebody who may be sitting at home and has no clue how things work in the national capital region, they might look at that and say, yo, that was absolutely real. But I'm looking at it like, I kind of feel like this was staged because I know how these guys operate. I know that any threat that could potentially take place, they're going to be positioned somewhere so that they can engage it immediately. Like, you ain't even going to get a chance to take that shot that gentleman took on that day in October of 2024. The shot that grazed the right ear of the elect at that time. No. It's not happening, bro. It ain't happening. Okay? So the fact that took place, it and I know how these guys operate. I'm like, well, wait a minute. How did this gentleman scale a whole building, right? Scale the building with a high-powered rifle at that, and a scope or rangefinder or whatever it was, set all of that up in the middle of this meeting where this elect was, and get that shot off without Secret Service engaging him, putting him down before he even had a chance to squeeze the trigger? Strange. That's strange, bro. It really makes me think that particular event could have been staged. I don't know how real it was. I can't bring myself to believe it, but because I know how they operate, I'm inclined to believe that it was not. That it was not. I mean, that it was staged. That was not a real. I'm using the word stage, but then I'm saying not real. Was it real? Yes. Was it staged real? Is what I kind of believe. And it starts to make me wonder if the reason why these federal law enforcement agencies may be discriminating against black men, whether it has something to do with a hidden agenda for these events that I believe are staged. I don't know. Y'all can let me know what you think in the comments section, especially those of you who work in the National Capital Region as armed security officers. I definitely need you guys to chime into this video. If you're seeing it, I need you guys to comment in the comments section. How often have you seen a black man or woman as a federal law enforcement officer in the United States Secret Service Uniform Division or Capitol Police Department. I need you guys to let me know, have you ever seen any black officers, male or female, that worked for the Federal Protective Services, federal officers that were under the age of like 50? Because I swear I haven't in 18 years of being an armed security officer in the National Capital Region. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the real Rayhan. And if you guys enjoyed this video, I definitely need you guys to smash that like button. If you guys are new to the channel, I invite you to subscribe via the subscribe button that will appear on your screen shortly, and ask that you do turn on your notification if you enjoy these real life experiences and storytelling that I deliver here on this channel. I want to thank you guys for joining me on this beautiful afternoon, and as always, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.